So in this chapter, we're going to look at fair division, okay? So in other words, how do you divide things so that it's fair, okay? Now, we're going to look into the word fair, and we're going to look into dividing things and so on and so forth as we get going. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a number of different parties. You can think people or parties, and each of them has an interest in dividing up either one or a bunch of objects, okay? And obviously each person, each party might have sort of different values, different interests, different, maybe even different percentages. Maybe one party is 60%, another party is 40%. So how would we do that? How do we divide things up in a fair way? Now, we're going to have some basic assumptions, all right? The first is that all of the parties want to maximize their share of good. Their share of the goods, excuse me. So, in other words, we're not going to have any parties who are going to sort of willingly lay over and let the other ones walk all over them, okay? And we're going to assume that the parties abide by the rules, and the parties aren't going to know everybody else's values, okay? So, for instance, we're going to pretend that we're not in a situation where, for instance, if my sister and I were dividing up goods, I knew that she only liked, I don't know, red candies, and I liked all the other candies, so I put all the red in a pile and all the others in a not pile. So we're going to assume that parties don't know the other party's values, okay? Although that is a big assumption. Now, we're going to say all parties have equal rights to the odds, or excuse me, to the goods. Excuse me, that's a typo there. So, should say goods. And so we're going to assume if we do have two people, they're 50-50. Now, I will mention a few times about, well, what if people don't have 50-50 shares in the goods? Or what if four people don't have equal allotments? Okay, but it's a pretty easy thing to fix if the parties don't have equal allotments, and we'll see that as we get going. Now, here's the really troublesome idea of fair division. It's the idea of fair share. Okay? Now, that was a kind of a campaign slogan in 2012, but it's a very broad term, and we're not obviously meaning it in the campaign way. Fair share means different things to different people. Okay? Because I might value something much higher than my sister values it. And she might value something much higher than I value it at. Okay? So, basically a fair share is that each party thinks that they get at least 1/n of the goods in their own opinion. All right? Now let me point out what this means. So, for instance, if it's me and my sister, we have two parties. Okay? So, when we walk away from this, I better think that I have at least half of the goods, and she better think that she has at least half of the goods. All right? If we don't, then we don't have fair shares. Now, most of the time what's going to happen is that one party is going to walk away and they think they got about half of the goods. One party is going to walk away and think they got slightly more than half of the goods. Okay? And because that's how they value things in their own mind. Okay? Maybe my sister values a trinket at a much higher value than I give it. Okay? So if I put it in a pile, all else being the same, she'll pick that pile and think she got a really good deal. Whereas I, don't think it's a big deal. Okay? So, anyways, fair share means each party gets at least 1/nth of the goods. Again, if there's 3 parties, then everybody should be walking away with thirds, in their own opinion. Okay? And that's a big idea. It's in their own opinion. This is not, some overlord saying, yes, this is 1/3 of the goods. It is in their own opinion. All right, so one of the first things, the first attempts at doing fair division is the idea of taking turns. And so you have a big pile of loot, okay? And instead of trying to divide it into, or instead of trying to divvy it out, what you do is you divide it into a bunch of piles. So let's assume we divide this into 6 piles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then each party takes a turn. So maybe I'll do this. I don't know why my sister and I keep coming up. I probably should give a different example. But let's take me and my sister. So who gets to go first? My sister picks pile 3. Okay? Then I pick pile 4. And then she picks pile 5. And I pick pile 1. And she picks pile 6. And then I pick pile 2. Now this seems logical, right? She got 3 piles and I got 3 piles. But the trouble with this taking turns is that it actually doesn't guarantee that we have a fair share. Maybe something really valuable was in that very first pile. Okay? Maybe something that, was really of high value to both of us ended up in that pile 3. And that's what my sister picked first. Maybe this has 50% of the loot by itself. Maybe it has 75% of the loot by itself. To both of us, in both of our eyes. And so, while taking turns seems logical, it's not really, there's no guarantee that each party gets a fair share. And one more thing about that, obviously there's a clear advantage to the people who pick first. Right? Whoever picks first in every round is always going to have sort of the upper hand. Now, there's ways to combat this. Maybe she gets the first pick, and then I get the next 2, and then she gets the next 1, and then I get 1, and so on and so forth. But still, whoever gets that kind of nice initial pick tends to fare better. Now, one method that guarantees everybody getting their fair share is called the divider-chooser method. Now, we've all seen a version of this, okay? We have 2 parties. So, again, I'll take my sister and I. So, me over here, my sister. Now, what's going to happen is there's going to be a big pile of loot. And I get to cut it into 2 pieces. All right? So we have one of the pieces, and by the way, I don't mean I cut things in half literally, but I'm saying you divide up the goods into 2 parts. So if this is, for instance, an inheritance, then, maybe I divide up a house on 1/2 and 2 cars on 1/2, and then I try to sort of divide monies around so I think it's roughly equal. Okay? Now, if I don't know my sister's priorities, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this, right? Now, here's the game. I divide it, and she picks. So she gets to pick whichever one she wants. So she gets to pick. And so knowing that this is going to happen, I have a very highly vested interest that in my eyes, this is half and half. Okay? Now in my sister's eyes, this might be slightly over half. Maybe this side, she thinks this is worth 54%. Oops. I'll just put 0.54. And she might think this is worth 46%. So she's obviously going to pick the one she thinks she values more. All right? So because that divider-chooser method will always leave me satisfied, I'll always think I got 1/2. And it will always leave my sister satisfied. She'll either think she got 1/2 or more, right? I mean, at the worst case scenario, she thinks this is 50-50 too. And then so she'll get 1/2. So because of this method, this actually is a method that ensures that each party gets their fair share. All right? So the divider-chooser method works and guarantees fair shares. Now the advantage of the divider-chooser method is that it's very straightforward. We've all seen it before. And it makes sure that each person gets their own fair share in their own eyes. Now the disadvantage is that it's always better to be the chooser. Okay? When my sister divides things up, if she was in the other shoes, she would think, well, 50-50 is the way she'd divide it up. And I might see one thing as being much more valuable than the other. Okay? So the disadvantage is in the divider-chooser method, it's always better to be the chooser, okay, irregardless. Now let me just mention one thing here. If I have a pile of loot, and let's say instead of being entitled to 50%, maybe I'm entitled to 60%. So let's pretend I have a business partner, and we're going to break up a company. And I own, let's pretend, 80% of that company, and he owns 20% of that company. The divider-chooser method can still be employed. Basically, if you look at the ratios of 80% and 20% out of 100, right? Well, 20% is 1/5, and 80% is 4/5. So all you have to do is, in this scenario, have the divider, instead of breaking up this pile of loot into 2 pieces, just break it into 5 pieces that are roughly 20% each. 20, 20, 20, 20, 20. And then the chooser can pick one of those piles. If my business partner is the chooser, they pick one of the piles. If I'm the chooser, he would divide it, and I would pick 4 out of the 5 piles. Okay? So if it's not always 50-50, there's a pretty easy way to do it. Just basically create more piles, and you want them all to be worth, the minimum percentage that, what it divides evenly into. And then have somebody pick certain numbers of piles. All right? And if I was the person that divided this evenly, He's going to pick one of these piles, so let's pretend he picks this one. And I'll have 80% left in my own eyes. If he's the one who divide these evenly, I pick 4 of the piles, and he's left with 20% in his eyes. So I think that I got at least 80%, and he got his 20%. If it's the other way, either way, these two people, being a business partner, will have, in our own eyes, 80 and 20% at least.